morning, everyone. I thought it would be a great thing to have a slot early in the morning, but following His Excellency's presentation is going to prove to be quite challenging. I will attempt to be informative, and in the absence of that, I will do my best to be brief so as not to take up too much of your time. As mentioned, I'm the Regional Director for Product Security at BlackBerry. Security, generally speaking, sits within the research and development side of the organization because it's always been the core of what we focused on. Today I'll be talking about taming user-driven mobility. And the idea behind that is, over the past, I would say, 5 years, we've seen a massive shift in the drivers behind the decisions organizations are making today. Whereas previously, innovation used to start from the enterprise and then spill over in the consumer sector, like with desktop computers, mainframes. They started in enterprise, and then you had laptops and consumer products. Now, consumer products are driving innovation in the enterprise sector. Most of you at home have devices that are more advanced than those issued by your organizations. So now consumerization is driving enterprise. And with His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed's initiative in M-Government, things are now moving from strength to strength, and speed is picking up quite substantially. And it's always been this balancing act between security and usability. It's always been this. For the past 10 years, had I been giving this presentation, always this divider. You want more security, you get less usability. You want more usability, you have to sacrifice security. And it's always been that. And at BlackBerry, we didn't escape this, with the user being almost dwarfed by over 500 IT policies, ways to control his mobility. We provide a mobile device management solution, and this is how the user's been treated. Ways of controlling his mobility. If you have a BlackBerry Enterprise server in your organizations, you can control every last aspect of the user's mobile device, what icons he sees, what he can and cannot do. And that's always been our approach, uncompromised security, because we started in enterprise. We started in Wall Street talking to finance, and we started in Washington talking to government. This was over 10 years ago, and that's where our roots began. So focus on enterprise security. But the problem here is, with the move towards consumerization, the focus shifted to the user. And it became very, very complicated to manage this environment. It became very complicated with the addition of more and more mobile platforms. A few years ago, had you asked anyone, how many mobile platforms do you think there were going to be a few years from now? They would have said 2, 3, maybe 4. We're looking at 10 by the end of this year. So there's an ever-growing increase in mobile platforms. And it's helped security, don't get me wrong. Whereas previously, we're in a Windows-only world, viruses would attack that platform and they would basically be effective against 95% of computers out there. With a diverse platform in mobility, we get a lot more. Why? Because infection doesn't cross one platform to the next. And this has left the administrator quite happy because you're able to control everything within these environments. That's the traditional approach. MDMs that allow administrators to control every last aspect of the user's mobility have made administrators very happy. But effectively, they've reduced high-end mobile devices with very high specifications to a device that can only send and receive email. They've effectively taken a very complicated piece of hardware and reduced it to the complexity of an abacus, circa 2500 BC. And that's very important. If you try to take something quite advanced, the user is bringing into the organization, or you're giving the user, and strip out functionality in lieu of security, you're reducing it to an abacus. Why not just give him an abacus? Why not give him something a lot more basic? You've left effectively the user heartbroken. And this is what His Excellency was talking about earlier. This change of mindset from a pure technological perspective to a more wider business perspective. How do you enable security without sacrificing usability and vice versa? This has been the balancing act we've been trying to play for the last 15 years in security. I'm IT through and through. I graduated computer science. A few years later, I went and got myself a law degree, and I tried to balance my expertise to see what the user wants and what the enterprise can deliver. And it basically forced us to go back to the drawing boards. Whereas BlackBerry was previously focused on enterprise, 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 we had to shift our perspective. We had to see what was being asked by the user. And the first thing that the user was asking for is no sacrifice in user experience. I cannot stress this more. The user will not accept any sacrifice on user experience. But from an organization perspective, and this is very important for us, there can be no compromise on enterprise security. Now, I'm a staunch advocate of privacy as well. So I see it as privacy on one hand and security on the other. And they can coexist hand in hand. And all of this has to come at an acceptable cost. It can't cost too much. It's easy to tell someone, I will develop a solution that will solve all your problems. It's just going to cost you millions and millions of dollars. Well, you're not resolving a problem, you're just introducing a new one, that of cost. So here's the challenge. No compromise on security or privacy, no compromise on the user experience, and at an acceptable cost. So we went back and started redesigning our environment, seeing what it meant to be able to do this. Because the majority of our clients are work in regulated environments. When I was presenting last time for Isaca in Kuwait, these are the questions that came to me. How do we deal with this in a regulated environment, in finance, in banking, in insurance, where lots of custodial information is being managed? How do we deal with the upcoming data protection regulation that's coming out of Europe, voted unanimously on last week? Well, I focus on what the user sees. Let's start with what the user sees. He sees the marketing pitch. Looks great, but then when you focus on it, somebody's telling you something. A vendor comes to your office. I work for a vendor, and I'm tasked with presenting my product in the best possible light. A vendor comes to your office and says, this will solve all your problems. But in fact, when it comes to security, it is what's beneath the surface that matters. It is the how, not just the what. What a product can do and how it does it are two very, very important things, which is why our focus has always been on certifying whatever we do. Whenever somebody comes to you and tells you, this product can do 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, solves all your problems, how do you know that it's actually doing this? How can you certify against this? You look at international certifications in terms of security, you look at common criteria, you look at FIPS, you look at CASG certifications, you look at multiple third-party bodies. But how do you know? And then how do you go back to your CIO with this? The modern CIO today has a three-pronged dilemma. Number one is business enablement, and that's being taunted all over the place. If you're not a business enabler, you're getting in the way of the business. And people who are in the way of the business tend to be removed quite expediently. Number two is the user. Three things: the experience, the expectation, and the productivity. The user experience can be sacrificed. We talked about this earlier. The user expectation has to always be increased. The user always has to get things that will go beyond his expectation, or else he'll be disappointed. And last but not least, productivity. Productivity is critical. So when I sit with CIOs today, productivity is top of mind. Why? Because they want to get more and more out of their users. And that means either more working hours or smarter working hours. And last but not least, and that's why we're here today, is risk management. Risk control versus the appetite of risk. Ultimately, that's what security comes down to, is the management of risk. There's no point of surrounding something of very little value with a very high wall. But at the same time, so you have to surround something of high value with an even higher wall. And that's risk management. That's the balancing act that you have to do. What level of security goes with what information? So, in mobility, what do we see today? We see multiple approaches of protecting information on traditional mobile devices, on smartphones. How do you protect information today? One approach is containerization. You take a standard environment iOS, Android, BlackBerry. You put a container on top of it, and you put all your information in that container. What are the benefits of this approach? Cross-platform usability. What are the problems? Well, if you put an secure environment on top of an insecure environment, then you have issues. It's like building a very, very big house, a very sturdy house on sand. The foundations don't last. So that's one of the concerns around containerization. A second approach is partial containers. And a lot of MDM vendors have approached this partial container approach because it's easier for the user to swallow. It's closer to the user experience. Some things are in the container, some things are nice and secure, but some things are available as part of the entire operating system. And the problem here is that with partial containers, you have partial protection and a higher risk factor. Third, and that's something that we were guilty of, is the IT policy race. How many times does a vendor come into your organization and say, I can do this many IT policies. I can invoke this many controls on your mobile environment. 500 IT policies, 1,000 IT policies, something that we did quite well for over a decade. How many IT policies can you put on a mobile device? How many ways can you reduce a very expensive piece of hardware into an abacus? It's not the right approach. It hasn't worked, and it's backfired, and it's one of the main reasons why containerization came with such vengeance back at us. And then multiple platforms. Multiple ways of developing on the same environment. Very confusing for security. How do you know that building something in a native environment, is it more secure than developing it in a non-native environment, in a cross-platform environment? And does scalability matter? If somebody comes to you and tells you, I have a solution that will solve all your problems, but for every 20 users you have to deploy a new server, or for every 100 users you have to deploy a new server, it doesn't scale. Scalability is critical. So I'm trying to show here that you can't take something in isolation. Security, scalability, the user experience, all of these things have to go hand in hand. And compromise is no longer an option. It's not fair to ask you to compromise on and on and on. Innovation has to come and resolve problems, not introduce new ones. There's a connection overload today. You are connecting more and more devices to your environment. So a few years ago, you had maybe 1, maximum 2 devices per individual. Now every person within your organization has multiple mobile devices, multiple tablets, multiple laptops, multiple desktop PCs, and other connected devices that want to connect. And that connection overload brings with it a certain aspect of risk. More numbers of connections, more there is a possibility that a malicious attacker is piggybacking on one of these connections. So it's different levels of compromise that we have to deal with. And it's quite frustrating that after so many years, we're still having to make the same compromise. We're still having to compromise either on security, or on usability, or on manageability, where the IT department has to take on more and more work and more responsibilities, put up more and more systems to deal with newer and newer peripherals. It's not fair on the IT department. It's not fair that a few years ago you had to manage mobility in a very, very focused perspective, and today you have multiple environments to do this. The approach that we took, and I'm going to talk a bit about BlackBerry right now purely because it's my area of focus, it's in my area of business, and I can give you an example, but please don't mistake this for a marketing pitch. It's not. I'm in R&D, and if you speak to me off this podium, I know nothing about the prices of our products. I know about the security within them. Whatever solution you had to bring to market had to be disruptive. It had to change the way things are done. It's like saying, everyone's playing checkers today, we're going to play chess. And the way that you introduce that is by approaching it differently. Some people are doing containerization, some people are doing partial containerization, some people are approaching it using virtualization. How do you bring no compromise on security and no compromise on usability in the same environment? Well, our approach was effectively to put 2 environments in 1 device and build it from the ground up. 2 parallel identities on every single device that you enable within your organization. 1 identity for the individual, where the user can install as many applications as he wants. His 3 versions of Angry Birds, his 4 versions of weather applications, every single thing that he wants without even needing a password. And with a single swipe of your finger, you're transported into a different environment, controlled by the enterprise. Everything is encrypted separately, everything is stored separately, data pathways are separate, everything is done separately. And this is not done one on top of the other as if in traditional containerization. They're done side by side. And that's very important, built from the ground up. So the best example I give, and I keep being asked to stop using it, is the Superman example. And within the IT industry, yes, we're a bit nerdy, so the Superman example works for me. It's like having two sides to the same coin. Clark Kent, the mild-mannered reporter in the daytime, basically your enterprise device, boring, to the point, does what it's supposed to do, and the superhero device at night. That's what you expect from a mobile device today. I don't want to see people walking around with two phones anymore. Be it BlackBerry or otherwise, you should only have one device that feeds all the purposes, your personal requirements and your enterprise requirements all in one, without risking enterprise security on one side or personal privacy on the other. It has to be, and from the IT perspective, it can't be 1,000,001 systems. It has to be a one-stop shop, one button you click to enable this separation, to allow for this to happen. It can't be 12 different systems. You're running around mad. You're having to hire more people or even ask people to work longer and longer hours to be able to manage all of this mobility. And it can't be on one single platform. It can't be just BlackBerry. So when we opened up our platform a few years ago, we said we want this to be available to everyone. We want the BlackBerry Enterprise Server available for all mobile platforms, for iOS, for Android, for BlackBerry, to be able to manage everything. We weren't going to ask people to go and force them either to use BlackBerry devices, that wasn't going to work, or ask them to go buy something else to provide that level of security. So we opened up our platform. Today, iOS, Android, BlackBerry, and upcoming, possibly Windows and other environments. This argument between usability and security had to end. This internal fight where the user's asking for one thing and the IT department is delivering another because the IT department can only do so much within its risk posture is no longer needed. We can't continue doing this battle over and over again, where the IT department's always being told that they're the brakes within the organization, that they're slowing things down. And I always give the example, well, without good brakes, cars wouldn't go too fast, because without good brakes, if you went too fast, if let's say you're driving a Ferrari with bad brakes, it's only going to be the one trip, and that's it. Now I leave you with a parting idea. I know that in IT, we've always been accused of being set in our ways. And here's something that I found to be quite interesting. On the left-hand side, this is the Mercator map, circa 1569. This is the map that's being taught to each one of you in your schools and probably being taught to your children today. On the right-hand side, you have the Peters projection map, circa 1855. If you pay close attention, this is Greenland. Looks about the same size of Africa in the map that we've taught all our lives. Here, Africa is far bigger than Greenland. That's because Greenland is about 2 million square kilometers versus Africa being 31 million square kilometers. The maps that we've been taught all our lives have been tweaked so that they look nice and pretty. They don't actually represent how the world looks like today or where things are. That's how small Europe is compared to Africa. So it's important to understand that what you believe today to be set things, usability or security, what you believe today to be non-movable truths, actually may be quite movable. And I will leave you with that. I hope that was brief enough, and I hope that was a bit educational as well. Thank you.